The Roman legions conquered an empire 2000 years ago. They fought against wild tribes from Britannia or Germania, against hundreds of guerrillas in Hispania, against empires like the Carthaginian or the Parthian, and even against pirates. But these legions evolved over the years, as their enemies changed over time, and therefore, the most appropriate way to fight and win also changed. We can divide the way the legions fought into three major blocks. The first of all is the Phalanx. The Phalanx was brought by the Greeks to the Italian peninsula, and the Romans copied the system. Let's see how this formation works. The Phalanx is a square or rectangle of men very close together and armed with pikes or spears. In the Roman case, they used spears in the Greek hoplite style. The concentration of so many spears turned the formation into an impenetrable hedgehog. The soldiers also carried a large shield on the left side of the ship that could protect them from enemy projectiles or spear thrusts. The Phalanx was a deadly crusher. From the front, it had a bunch of spear tips pointing towards the enemy charging at them, who faced the impossible task of dodging the spears and getting close to the soldiers carrying them. The problem with phalanxes is that their flanks and rear are completely defenseless. You have to think that, for example, if the phalanx was made up of, let's say, 16 soldiers in front by 16 deep, the time needed to pivot and face an enemy coming from the side is tremendous. Rome, when facing the Greeks in Italy, could afford the phalanx as it was a frontal combat, but when it began to fight against enemies who did not fight in phalanx but fought in small groups that did not form a common front, the phalanx was useless, as these groups attacked from all sides. These enemies were in the center of Italy, where the terrain was also mountainous, so moving a group of 256 men very close together, holding the spears horizontally and advancing on a long front was impossible. The front was constantly falling apart. If the Romans wanted to continue expanding, they had to find a new method to fight, and they found it. The phalanxes were replaced by the maniples and spears were replaced by swords. The Maniples were combat units composed of 2 centuries, about 80 men each, which significantly reduced the size of the unit compared to the Phalanx. I'm going to take a break here. Actually, with the number of troops in the Maniples, there is one size for Stati and Princes and another for the Triari. Secondly, to these centuries were added some Velites, who were called associates, who were part of the century, but at the same time, they were not. We will see it in another video in depth. Just stick with an alert about the data of 80 men per century. Now let's continue. The first advantage of the Maniples over the Phalanx was maneuverability. The Maniples advanced in a formation similar to a chessboard, as we see on screen. This, using the previous example of the mountains, allowed the front to shrink like a spring to dodge the obstacle, and after passing it, to extend again and continue as if nothing had happened. The second advantage was that since it was not necessary to form a solid front, the Maniples had more independence within the army, so they could face enemies attacking from any point. Following this advantage, if a unit was fighting head-on and was attacked from a flank, it could immediately pivot and continue fighting in a considerably short amount of time, as they now carried a shield and sword, not a long spear. Each of the 3 lines of Maniples in the Roman legion was made up of a different type of soldier. We will surely see them in more depth in a later video, but now we will take a look at each one. The Hastati formed the first line. The soldiers were the legion's youngest and most inexperienced. Well, actually the Velites were, but since they are skirmishers, we are going to leave them for later. The Hastati were the first to enter combat. Their weapons were the shield, the sword, and javelins, which at some point would be replaced by pila. This is a big change, another one in relation to the phalanx, because now the soldiers carried throwing weapons in addition to hand-to-hand combat weapons. The second line was formed by the princes. They carried the same weapons as the Hastati, but they were older and more experienced than the former. When the order was given, the Hastatis would retreat behind the princes, and this ensured that the Romans always had a fresh front while the enemy was tired. The Triarii formed the last line. These soldiers were the oldest and most veteran of the entire legion. They were elite troops, and unlike the Hastati and the princes, they kept the spear, a reminder of the phalanx. It was not normal for them to go into combat, and if they did, it was because the situation was very desperate. In fact, there was a Roman saying that was, "The fight has reached the triarii." If you heard this, it meant that things were very, very bad. Outside of the Maniples were the Velites. These soldiers were skirmishers who went ahead of the Hastati, and their only function was to throw javelins at the enemy and retreat, as they were not equipped to fight hand to hand with a guarantee of victory. This combat system lasted quite a few years, until the arrival of Gaius Marius, a veteran Roman who had fought in Celtiberia and who was elected consul 7 times, something unheard of in Roman history. The Maniples were replaced by cohorts. The main reason is that now large-scale combat was needed, and a mere maniple was not going to change the outcome of a battle, so cohorts were created, each made up of 3 maniples. 480 legionnaires in total. In the new legions, specializations were eliminated, that is, there were no longer any Hastati, princes, or triarii. Now, all soldiers will be the same, with the same standardized weaponry. The elites were eliminated and replaced by auxiliary troops. These were soldiers without Roman citizenship, separated by cultures. In addition, regarding supplies, each legionnaire carried his own equipment. That is, they carried their weapons, their tent, and even stakes to set up the camp. They could carry up to 40 kilos on their back, which is why they were known as Marius's mules. The legionnaires were now capable of doing anything. They could dig, forage, build, cook their own food, and did not need pack animals, which is desirable when in enemy territory. It is desirable when in enemy territory. Now, if there were casualties, the units could come together to fill gaps. That is, if there were 2 cohorts with half the soldiers, they would come together to form a single cohort with all the troops. They would unite to form a single cohort with all the troops. The number of troops in an army, cohorts could be added, and they were integrated ipso facto. Let's review the 3 types of battle formation that the Romans had. The Phalanx, lethal from the front but useless if attacked from the flanks or the rear. In mountainous terrain, they were terrible at advancing in a solid front. The Maniples, with excellent mobility, could face an enemy attacking them from any side and incorporated throwing weapons. The problem was that they required pack mules and supply trains. They were small units for an empire, and couldn't easily join 2 Maniples together, as there were 3 different types of units. The cohorts, excellent mobility, autonomous units, they didn't need engineers or supply trains, and were large units suitable for extensive empires. In addition, the legionnaires were interchangeable among the cohorts, and all the material was standardized. It's not that one organizational method was better than another. Each served this purpose throughout the history of Rome. The Romans were a people who were not attached to their customs or their methods. They copied and optimized superior ideas from others. Up to this point, if they saw that someone else's was better than theirs, they copied it and optimized it. That's it for this video. If you liked it and want to know more about the Roman legions, subscribe, give it a like, and leave in the comments what you would like me to talk about in the next Rome video.